Okay. So just to preface all of this, I really want, you folks to all feel like you can engage, whether you're here in person or on the computer. So if you have questions at any point, or thoughts or whatever, feel free to raise your hand, chime in, and this is the sort of quick and dirty version of this history. So, if there's something we want to get more in depth into, we have plenty of time. And I guess did I introduce myself? I'm Chessie Monks-Kelly, and I'm the archivist and curator here at Historic Saranac Lake. I also wear a lot of other hats, as I suspect all of you are used to. So I'm physical plant manager, if you will, in addition to all the collection stuff. So I worry about our 2 historic buildings in the middle of the night. So at 11 o'clock-ish, our architect, one of our architects, Kim Alvarez, is going to join us via Zoom to talk about what it's like to be the architect on the side of this project, and answer questions if you guys have any. So let's get started. So archives and architecture, or historic buildings and the museum staff that love them. Who love them? Can you guys see this? Okay. So this is a picture of the Saranac Laboratory. If you're not here in person, you didn't get to see it this morning, but we do indeed love this building very much, and it is a bit of a problem child sometimes, as I'm sure you've all experienced with your own historic buildings. So we're going to talk first. Let me let Megan. We're going to talk first about this building, the work that we've done here, and our organization more broadly, and then move on to our expansion. So the Saranac Laboratory was built in 1894 as the first laboratory in the United States for studying tuberculosis, which is, maybe doesn't feel like much of a superlative if you're not super into tuberculosis as we are, but it's very cool, very cutting edge science research happening here, as well as research into other lung diseases throughout the years. So this building has been added onto a couple times. You can see from the picture, it looks like a little bit of a Franken building. And so that's something we are dealing with too. So let me just tell you about Historic Saranac Lake, the organization. We were established in 1980. This is a royal we, because I was not yet alive or working here, as you might have guessed. We started as an architectural preservation organization. This was largely in response to the modernization movements happening in the 60s and 70s. I'm sure you've all seen the big glass windows, brick facades, etc., that got added to a lot of historic buildings during that time period. And so, the locals said, we got to do something about this. Saranac Lake has unique architecture in a lot of ways, and they wanted to help protect it and incentivize protecting it. So one of those unique architectural features is the cure cottages, which is where tuberculosis patients stayed, as well as the sanatoriums, which were big campus facilities. This is a bit of a humble brag here. Saranac Lake has the highest number of per capita buildings listed on the National Register of Historic Places. We just found that out recently. That's per capita. Of course, we have a small population versus a lot of buildings. So, Boston might have a lot more buildings by number, but per person. So they worked very hard in the 80s and listed more than 250 individual cure cottages, as well as district nominations and sanatoria and things like that. They also hosted TB reunions for patients who had come here. For those of you who don't know about Saranac Lake and the TB era, between the 1870s and the 1950s, tens of thousands of people came here for treatment for tuberculosis. And, it was as you might imagine, a difficult time in a lot of their lives. It also meant leaving home, leaving your family, your job, but it also meant meeting new people, having new experiences. And so the reunions were wildly popular, and it was sort of a last chance to catch many of these generations of TB patients before they were gone. So we did 2 of those in the late 80s and early 90s, and they were very successful. So as an architectural preservation organization, we recognize the importance of place. A lot of museums, libraries, archives would sort of kill for the opportunity to have a space that was so immersive. We, in recognition of that, received the opportunity to own the Saranac laboratory, which this is a historic 1897, I think, photo of it here on the screen. In the late 90s, we were given the building. And so we wanted to give people that experience. And those of you here in person will go upstairs to the lab at some point today, and you can feel it for yourself. But it really does take you back to a particular time period just by being in the space. So museums are not, of course, built in a day. As I said, we got the laboratory building in 1999. We spent almost 10 years in rehabilitation, and this was largely a volunteer effort, which is wild to imagine. Everything from electrical to hardwood floor refinishing to repointing bricks was done by volunteers. We opened as a museum in 2009. We revamped the museum when I got here in 2015. So back in 2009, when the museum first opened, we would drop everything and give whoever walked in the door a tour, which is hard, depending on the volume of people that you're seeing. And as the heritage tourism increased in Saranac Lake, it became sort of untenable for us to do that. We'd never get anything done. And so we redid all the exhibits so that they were self-guided. Of course, we're still here to talk to museum visitors, and we answer so many questions all day. But that was really an important step for us as a museum. And as far as I'm concerned, the collection has been growing sort of incidentally since 1980. I've heard lots of stories of people just handing things to our former executive director. She had stuff at her house that eventually made its way over here, particularly at the TB reunions. And then once we opened as a museum, we had a policy where the local library had more of an archival collection. And we had the space for stuff and theoretically space to exhibit it. And so anything paper-based would go to them, and any objects would come to us. So in the last few years, we've been really working on implementing policies for the collection and things like that for the first time. But I just want to show you a before photo of the room that we are in now. You can actually see the 2 sconces by the fireplace, or the glowing orbs behind me on the video. If you're in the room, it's looking this way towards the big window. So that was what it looked like when we got the building in 1999. There were lots of other scarier things I'll show you. Now, for those of you who aren't here in person, we have completely restored and rehabilitated the spaces in the building as much as we can, and now have exhibits throughout the building. So speaking of the collection growing sort of incidentally, I think everyone here has a scary space in their facility. This is our institutional records when I arrived here, for example. Nobody's perfect. And we all have that space that we don't like to show to the public. But we have made a lot of progress with the collections, even just getting stuff off the floor. getting basic inventories, things like that, all happened before I arrived here. So whew, we were in a good place to really start focusing on collections work, documenting, cataloging, making available to the public. And, you know, the one problem here, of course, is that this is still an attic space. It is unheated, uncooled, unhumidified, etc. It is secure. We have locks and things, but, you know, it's not ideal. It's not good storage conditions for collections items or people, for that matter. It's often difficult to work up there in the summer, depending on the heat. So I just want to show you a couple other scary before and after. This is in the laboratory itself. You might have noticed in the original picture, the big windows on the building, they had been severely reduced in size. They had, it was actually used as a dorm and a classroom space for a while. So they put in bathrooms and bedrooms and all kinds of wacky stuff. So here's in our office space, the Trudeau house with the complete with stein of beer for your college students. So it's not exactly a museum space. So here's another humble brag. So here we are at the point where we have exhibits in the lab. It looks great. And we have collections that are stored properly and identified and cataloged. And this is a promotional photo we took when we received our first IMLS grant to do collections photo cataloging. So there I am pretending to do some sort of collections work with the photos, even though I don't usually sit in the middle of the museum and do my cataloging. So as the title implies, historic laboratories, they're not ideal collection storage for a whole bunch of reasons. They are hard to heat and cool. This building, as I said, was built in 1894. It's was heated probably with coal. Coal was pretty cheap and abundant. And so, you know, ventilation was king. You could crank the heat real high and keep the windows open. There's lots of light. This is a picture taken in the middle of the winter with no lights on, and yet you can still see, you know, fairly bright daylight. That causes problems for our collections in terms of UV exposure, as well as making it cold in the winter. If you look at the walls around the window, they're made out of bricks and stone. This building was built to be fireproof. Which is awesome if you're worried about fire, and not awesome if you're worried about Wi-Fi or being able to run an HVAC system or electrical. Again, the building, you know, would have been ventilated by just having the windows and doors open, which brings in all kinds of critters. We are I see Lydia looking around. We're actually sitting in the one space in the building right now that has an HVAC system now. We have a split that we installed this summer in our John Blackman Library because it is our event space. And on an 85-degree day, putting 70 people in here with a band or whatever is really rough. And so we got a grant to cool the space down a bit, which our books are very happy about. And there's no insulation because if you, again, have a building built out of brick and stone that's meant to be fireproof, there's no place to put insulation. There's no there. And, you know, we have plaster walls. All of these things work together to make it difficult to add things after the fact. And I just want to show you this window, an example of the type of damage that we see. This nurse's cape used to stand with its back to the window. And when I got here, I said, wait a darn second. And so it's very faded on the back. We have, speaking of UV exposure, in the last year, installed interior storm windows, which are UV filtering, which is really awesome. And it does help cut down on the temperature differences as well as the noise. So if anyone has questions about that, that was a really cool process, and I love them. So I'm happy to talk about that. So we made the best of it. we put our collections in sort of a room within a room in the attic in order to, make it more secure, protect from water leaks, things like that. We made sure everything was in a box in some format. We did the best we could. And we were really getting to the point where I was starting to, bang my head against the brick wall because there really wasn't a good solution available to us for the long term. So sometimes the solution is right next door to you. So you can see that little smidge of blue. That is the back end of what was Dr. Trudeau's home and medical office. So he had a very short commute from home to the laboratory. In 2017, the doctor's office that had been there for more than 100 years announced that they were closing. And so we kind of noticed the building for the first time at that point. I mean, we knew it was there, but, we started to think about it a little bit more. And so our director and I, took tours and talked to the board, and we started to float the idea of the possibility of expansion. And it's one of those things where you just sort of have to take the leap at some point. But we started to feel like we were a little bit crazy. But what the Trudeau building does offer is several thousand square feet. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. It has frontage on Main Street next to the biggest hotel in town, historic hotel. It has parking. It's easier to get into. It has collection storage space, which is yay for me. I joke that this expansion is mostly for me. It's not, but so as crazy people, we bought the building in 2018. What happened next? What happened the next year or two after that?
Oh, the pandemic?
The pandemic, yes. So we were in the middle of a huge fundraising, planning, etc. Project when the pandemic started, which of course was hard for everybody in terms of funds, in terms of staffing, in terms of public health. And so things have gotten delayed a bit, as a lot of things have. The price of construction has gone up wildly. All these things happened, immediately after we bought the building, of course. But we are moving on. So what is 118 Main Street? As I said, it was the second home of Dr. Edward Livingston Trudeau on the site. The reason it was the second home is because the first one burned down. Dr. Trudeau had built a small laboratory on the back in order to research tuberculosis, and the laboratory caught fire one night while they were out of town and took the whole house with it. So after the fire, a friend, we could all use a friend like this, contacted him and said, I heard about the fire. I want to help you do the Phoenix trick and build a new laboratory. So you decide what you want the laboratory to be, and I will pay for it. So they built this laboratory at that point, and then they rebuilt the house next door. So he and his family lived there past his death. He died in 1915. His wife continued to live there. They raised children there. And then eventually his son and his grandson both practiced medicine in that building. And his daughter-in-law actually lived there after his son passed away. She had an apartment on the second floor. And so people always say that Mrs. Trudeau haunts the building. But there is a little doorbell out front with her name on it still. So it's been a mixed use building for some time. And one of the things about the building is that they added a medical office on. People started showing up at Dr. Trudeau's door seeking care. I sometimes joke that it's hard to separate my personal life from my work life here in a small town. It was even harder for him. And so they added a wing on so that he could at least tell patients to stop coming to the front door and sort of separate that work and family life. So it had more than 100 years use as a medical office because of that. And it shows. So here's the house as it was first built. It's a smaller building, and it's got the beautiful front portico on it still, porches, things like that. This is Dr. Trudeau's first sleeping porch, which we'll get to see when we go over next door. He was sick with tuberculosis himself, and so he had his own cure porches. But using a building as a doctor's office requires some strange changes from house to medical office. So we have things like examination tables. There are sinks in just about every darn room. Rooms have been divided up. There's that sort of institutional Berber carpet over everything. All sorts of things that you wouldn't think about. Out in the hallway, there's tape measures for checking patients' heights. A nurse's check-in station, stuff like that. So what are we going to do with it? Great question. Expanded museum exhibits are the initial name of the game. Of course, we use just about as much space as we can in the lab for exhibits now. It's hard in a historic laboratory to tell a story of historic grape camps or the logging industry. It's sort of confusing for museum visitors. There's not a lot of space, things like that. We're gonna have a screening room. So we have a new film that we've developed. I'm getting ahead of myself a little, but immersive exhibit spaces. So you get to go out on those cure porches and see, even in the wintertime, you can go out there and sit on the chair if it strikes you, and see what it was like. A dedicated secure collection storage wing, which is actually Dr. Trudeau's medical office wing. That public reading room is in that space. It would have been the first room you came into when going to see Dr. Trudeau as a patient there. So it's, in keeping with the spirit of it, it's a public space, a space where people can come get help. I'm not going to cure anyone's tuberculosis, but I will help them research. We'll have leased office spaces, at least in the beginning, that help pay the bills. It also gives us room to expand, say we have more staff members or we need, classroom space or something like that down the line. Expanded accessibility features. Almost the entire first floor of the building is handicap accessible as it stands. We are adding an elevator so that you can get to the second floor. Ramps so that you can access the collections wing with wheelchair walker or even with just a cart with boxes on it, which is great. And then we're going to update the exhibits in the Saranac laboratory. So as I said, we sort of cram stuff in here. You'll see when you go around, we make the best of it, but we really want to be able to focus more on the science and research history here at the lab because there are a lot more stories to tell, whether it's from the doctors and researchers who worked here, to the asbestos research that was done here and covered up in the 1940s because it was commissioned by the largest producer of asbestos at the time. So there's all kinds of untold stories that we just don't have the space for. So this is a mock-up of one of the spaces in the Trudeau building. Now, this is not final. This is, we're in schematic design 2, which I guess means something if you're an exhibit designer in terms of the progress. But, we're just starting to think about what themes go in what rooms, how we want to lay out casework. And then from there, we go to the point where we pick artifacts and photos. And so this is sort of a mock-up. But this room here is one that talks about early logging and farming, natural resource extraction, if you will, in the Adirondacks. Not in the Adirondacks, but in the Saranac Lake area specifically. We've all, been very gung-ho about this process from the beginning, but it's hard sometimes for people to wrap their heads around what we're looking at, especially when you see photos of the space, which I will show you some, and see it in person. It really helps to see it, even if things are going to change. It helps put you in the place. Our architect Kim has just joined us. Hi, Kim. Hold on, my thing doesn't want to go. There we go. So what have we done so far? As I said, we've owned the building since 2018. We haven't just been letting it gather dust. During the pandemic, actually, we spread out into the building so that we could all have our own office spaces and stay safer that way. But in terms of construction and demolition and so on, we've removed all the asbestos material, not personally. We pay people handsomely to do that. But it was over 2,000 square feet of asbestos floor material, for example. We've done some light demolition, taking down ceiling tiles, things like that. We had volunteer open house days where people could come and like screw around helpfully. But here you take up carpet or you carry these tiles to the dumpster or whatever. People had a lot of fun. It's very fun to tear stuff up. Revealing and documenting existing historic features. Kim and Jack, our architects, and I have had some fun pulling drywall up, carpets, where does this floorboard go? I think there might have been a door here, let's see, all that kind of stuff. We've done detective work using historic photographs from our collection from the library to see what features were there originally, how rooms were used, things like that. So Kim and Jack have done all the amazing architectural design and demolition planning, restoration. We've planned for use of spaces, as you saw in that little rendering, what goes where, planning for accessibility improvements. And as I said, that's everything from an elevator to ramps. There's the initial schematic design of exhibits. So we've sort of nailed down what space gets used for what, even if we don't know exactly what the wall text will say. Production of a new introductory film, which, is a great update from our 1980s number that starts with, the untamed wilderness can't be claimed by man, which, could use an update. This picture shows just some of that revealing that we've done. We, from photos, were fairly certain that there was a porch next to what will become the reading room, a door from the porch into that space. And we found it on the original door underneath the 70s wood paneling and that beautiful, beautiful metallic wallpaper that is actually so metallic that if you walk by it, it will shock you when you have socks on the carpet. I can say that because it was my office for a couple of years. Digging around where we can, and you'll see some of that as we go through. So what happens next? So much demolition. The real stuff, not just the things that volunteers can do, but the things you need hard hats for. Goodbye to blue vinyl siding. The building was historically wood siding that was painted a dark red, and so it will be red again. Restoration of the historic features that do exist. Porches, porticos, floors, molding, lions, tigers, and bears. It is, what is there, we will keep. And we will point out things that aren't still there as we can. We have a feature that's going to be throughout the building, the history detective, where you can look at historic photos, look at photos pre-renovation, things like that to understand the progression of the building. Continued planning of exhibits, of course, cataloging collections. And I say thanks, IMLS, because we just found out on Wednesday that we got another IMLS grant to spend the next couple of years focusing on cataloging objects and archival material in preparation for the move. So that's really awesome. And then adjusting plans based on cost and uncovering unknown unknowns. I'm sure everyone here has, had a leaky faucet and then had to discover a secret plutonium mine under the house or whatever. There's always something you don't expect, and we can't know what that is until we take down walls and peel up carpets and things. So we anticipate, fingers crossed, the end date of the project is December 2025. And then at that point we can install exhibits and prepare to open to the public. So here, this is my joke that stuff's really getting real because we got a porta potty. The contractor is actually the site manager, is actually next door today. So you guys will get to meet him when we go over there. We had a groundbreaking last Tuesday, which was really awesome. We had a huge community turnout. We sold these really cute shirts as a fundraiser, and you know, people finally got to. We did an open house, so people got to walk through and see those renderings and sort of get a better feeling for the space, which is really helpful. Helps with community buy-in and you know, understanding what's going on. So Kim's going to talk a little bit more about this, I think, but I just want to mention a couple of considerations with a historic building that we've encountered that you might not expect. The building is a piece of the collection in itself, right? It's a historic space. It helps tell the story of Saranac Lake, of Dr. Trudeau, of this place. So we have original architectural features versus museum standards and best practices. You know, it might be standard to have, you know, a whole building HVAC system, but that's hard in a house with plaster walls that was built in 1894. Accessibility requirements. You know, those stairs were not necessarily built for people with different abilities, and so, you know, how can we fit in a you know, staircase and an elevator and half a lula, half elevator that gets you to the floor, the ground floor, things like that. Space and storage needs. You know, we might want to preserve the original footprint of a room, but it might be really small or sort of a weird shape. Grant requirements. We have a huge amount of funding through various grant programs. And so we're working with the State Historic Preservation Office carefully to make sure that we are respecting those original architectural features while making it work as a museum. Community expectations are a big part of it. People have memories of the building because it was a medical office for so long. Just about every person who walked in the door during our open house said, "Oh, this was Dr. So-and-so's office," or, you know, "Oh, here's where we would wait to see the doctor. I remember getting my vaccinations here." So, you know, everybody has great ideas about what should happen in a space, and we can't do all of them. Code requirements with a historic building are kind of murky. You get grandfathered in on certain things, but you also don't want to like accidentally burn the building down just because you don't have to do a certain thing. And weirdness. Historic buildings sure have some weirdness. As you saw, that building got added onto in 2 phases. It got used as medical office. Everything got changed, and so we have things like these 2 offices that are next to each other, but if you can see under that door, there's about a 6-inch drop between the floor levels, which is where ramps come in. We have windows that got turned into not windows in order to use them as office spaces. So it's you know, you can see there's a window that's painted over to the left-hand side of the photo, and then this glass block opening on the right-hand side. So there's, you know, history has not always been kind to the structure of the building. So this is what it will look like when we are done, roughly. Obviously, this is a rendering, but this has been the poster image that we have been looking towards this whole time. You know, improved exterior restoration of porches and cure porches and the portico. You know, it's all, I often say to people, there's nothing in that building that's not getting touched in some way, even if it's just a coat of paint, right? So stay tuned, I guess, for this. And I just want a couple more thoughts before I show you some floor plan things. You know, best practices are not always available, as I said, with the building, but also the costs, the feasibility, but it's not an all or nothing prospect, as we've, you know, learned in our work over here too. So we do the best that we can with an eye towards improvement when we can in the future, if that's a funding issue or whatever. So here, an example is the attic where we store the collections in this building right now has a huge bay of glass windows. I obviously glass windows. They have windows that faces east directly. So every morning the sun would come up and preheat the building for us. And so in the last few years, we put up reflective bubble wrap basically over the window. We don't need the window in there, you know. So that reflects a lot of that heat from the sun. We also installed an exhaust fan basically that runs on a thermostat, and it blows hot air out of that space into the rest of the attic. So, you know, it's not a state-of-the-art, you know, HVAC system, but it is a baby step. It was more than baby step, but it is a measure that we could do that was relatively inexpensive, and, you know, will help us add years of life to the collections by not baking them to death once every year. So this is just my example of cost as a barrier. You might not be able to read that, but it says $5.2 million. That number had already been updated once, and it is more than that now. And so, you know, we recognize that a project like this is not necessarily available to most organizations. And so, you know, again, just trying to improve as you are able, and maybe one day you might be in, you know, nutty enough to take on something like this. So what goes where, of course, is the ultimate question. So I want to hold on, show you a couple. Can you see that? No, you can't. Please hold. I have to switch. Okay, so this is one of the design documents from our exhibit designers. I'm not going to show you everything, but I do want to show you the other document, show you a couple of floor plans. So sorry, I meant to cue this up before I got on here. So the bulk of the building gets used for exhibit space, of course. That was the whole, you know, point of the project. But the nice thing about that expanded exhibit space, wow, don't have it, is that, you know, it really gives us space to talk about, oh, here we go, topics that we haven't been able to cover before. And so that's everything from Native American history and present day life in the Adirondacks, you know, early industries. And you guys who are here in person, I'll show you bigger on the screen afterward. But you know, early industries that logging, hunting, great camps, and the guides, and the people who came here on vacation. The Adirondacks is the birthplace of the vacation as we know it, and so that also includes hotels, of course, the Adirondack Park Agency. But the other thing that's important is the Trudeau family. This was their home, and so we talk in this first space that's space A, intro and parlor. Really gets into you know, how they use the home, who lived there, what their lives were like, and things like that. So museum visitors, it's not chronological but thematic, but you're sort of moving through time at the same time. So you're, you know, once you leave the parlor talking about the family history, you move into Native American indigenous stories, as well as a timeline. And there's a room just to the left that's our screening room, which is exciting because we've had all sorts of bootleg screening room setups throughout the year, including the TV that these guys are watching my presentation on. So if I zoom out a little bit, I just want to point out, I don't know if everyone at home can see my mouse, but can you? The bottom wing in this rendering is where the collection storage is. There's a large open space at the bottom center of this rendering that is our reading room. And that's a first for us. We don't have a dedicated space for people to come and do research, and we have a really awesome collection, if I do say so myself. So we want to make sure that that's available to people. The top wing that has no colors on it in this is that leased office spaces, the elevator, the stairs out of the building, and some bathrooms, of course. So once you are done on this floor, you would head upstairs. This is where we really get into the experience of patients who are here for treatment. So it's talking more about the people who worked in the TB industry, you know, and the architecture that evolved because of that, the sanatoria. You also have the opportunity, as I said, to go out on the cure porch and see what it was like. Then you would move on to a room about the patient experience. So we would profile patients who were here, what it was like, you know, how they got here, how they paid for it, what they ate, what they did with their time, whether they lived or died. All of these, you know, there's so many stories we could tell. And so, you know, we're just skimming the surface really there, but it helps people understand, you know, the industry that built Saranac Lake. We will also have space on this floor to talk about Gary Trudeau, the Trudeau family legacy leading to Gary and the Doonesbury comics, the Winter Carnival buttons, as well as famous patients from Bela Bartok to Christy Mathewson. So, you know, again, we're limited by space, but we really want to give people an introduction. And if they want to go further, you know, staff are there to answer questions. We can point them to the wiki site, or they can do research in the reading room. So it's really, you know, an introduction. The other cool thing about this floor is that we have a special exhibit space where we can do rotating exhibits. And one of the things we plan to do is every February will be an exhibit about Winter Carnival, because people are coming here for that and, you know, want to know that history. And so, you know, we have an eye in the design towards modularity so that we can, you know, easily sort of standardize, like, oh, the title panel is always the same size, but we can swap it out for a new exhibit without it being a big production. Or, you know, oh, we want to put a particular artifact on display, you know, for, you know, Women's History Month. We want to make sure that we have an artifact that reflects that, or, you know, so it's been important for me, and our designers and architects have been great in that process too, to be able to rotate more of our collection, because it is cool, and there are so many stories that go along with it. So that is the basic floor plan. Things have changed, things will change, but you know, as I said, we had a groundbreaking on Tuesday, and things are starting, things are thinging, and so, you know, we're really like about to leap off the cliff, except we don't have to do most of the leaping personally, because that's what the contractors are for. But you know, it's really starting after all these years of planning and waiting and fundraising. It really is starting to come together. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I just, if anybody has any questions, either you folks in person or anybody on the Zoom that I can answer right now, feel free to chime in. They're like painful. Hi, Kim.
Thank you.
Thanks, Meg. So I guess no questions coming up. I want to introduce an awesome part of our team, an awesome member of our team, Kim Alvarez, who with her husband Jack, is our architectural architects and preservation consultants and all kinds of fun stuff wrapped into one. And Kim and Jack, we've known for a very long time, with their work on Hotel Saranac next door, as well as other sort of National Register goings on. And Kim has graciously agreed to talk a little bit about what it's like to work on a project like this and sort of the considerations. So I'm gonna toss it over to you, Kim.
Thank you, the real Chessie Monks Kelly. I appreciate that. Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Alvarez with the firm Landmark Consulting. We are a historic preservation planning and architecture firm. For the purpose of today's conversation, I think I should say we are not museum planners or exhibit planners, but rather we work probably 95% of our projects, our workload is on historic buildings, and probably 85% of those clients are not-for-profits, museums type, nonprofits with an educational kind of charitable mission. So this is not our first rodeo working on a house museum, but we to that point, the considerations of working in a historic building and planning for a museum or exhibit design, and the circulation of the public through those buildings, there are a lot of considerations. I like that Chessie pointed out that the building itself is often one of the biggest parts of the collection. I have been an architectural assessor with the Conservation Assessment Program. Some of you may know it's kind of gone through various iterations. The CAP program, it was originally with Heritage Preservation, the Smithsonian. I don't even know who it's through anymore, but I think it's still going. But my point is I would often get teamed with a collections assessor, and together we would make recommendations, do assessments of a small museum space. And my first point would always be, do not forget that your historic building is part of your collection, and often maybe the first reason or first way that you're attracting your visitors, your constituents. They want to know more about the building, and then through that you're showing them what's inside and what the extent of your collections are. So with that said, we kind of treat the building in the same way that you might treat a historic artifact. We study it, we try to date it, we try to understand its origins, its evolution, because of course buildings change dramatically over their lifetime. This house is case in point. But we also know that it has a lot of different program needs. It needs to meet code. It needs to move people safely through a building. It needs to protect your collections in terms of climate and controlled spaces. It needs to protect the public and the occupants from potential hazards like fire. It needs to also then become sort of a vanilla box to against which to exhibit the stories you're trying to tell, and display the exhibits, parts of your collection, whether they're moving and rotating exhibits or permanent exhibits. So there's a lot of balancing act to happen here with museum best practices, as well as working with the historic site. I know that there are oftentimes museum professionals that would much rather have a brand new, metal stud and drywall building with state-of-the-art HVAC systems to then work out and display with very easy spaces to work your modular exhibits into. But there's also the kind of the quirkiness or the weirdness, as Chessie mentions, that can evoke additional information and learning and history if you are working within an unusual or historic space. So we feel like that environment, for example, the parlor space, which will exhibit the Trudeau families, how they lived, is probably the most intact space in this house, in that because it was used sort of as a reception space for the medical offices, really was not altered all that much, aside of a bathroom stuck in the corner. But it's got a beautiful fireplace. It's got a bay window. It's got, woodwork and architectural character that are great background elements for furnishings, for exhibit panels, for kiosks, or particular lighting, or information put on the walls. It doesn't have to be, a blank space necessarily, because there's something more to invoke and to get out of that space if there's some architectural character. One of the kind of challenges that we work with the historic building is, well, in this case, there wasn't a whole lot of historic character or fabric that was intact, or it was just covered over with multiple layers. As Chessie said, we love to kind of dive in and start pulling layers back, seeing what we could expose, whether it was a plaster wall, remnants of an old fireplace, beautiful preserved hardwood floors. But when you don't have a lot of historic fabric, we relied heavily on historic photos to understand, while we may not be taking a space back with its, late Victorian wallpaper or really ornate light fixtures, or trim molding profiles and stuff like that, we know enough about the location of doorways or windows, or how furnishing was set up in these spaces, to provide a little bit of context in which, the rest of the history or that exhibit will sit in there. We had to spend a little bit of time trying to understand, through the evolution of the building, the original floor plan, because it had been chopped up so much, but also chopped up and walls removed at the same time. So it's funny, they would add walls where there hadn't been some and take walls away where there were. So this little bit of architectural sleuthing is often a big part of our work, to understand original floor plans, where doorways were existed, where they are no longer. In the case of the Trudeau building, we had to understand very clearly, as Historic Saranac Lake was working with the museum planners to plan the circulation of the visitor through the exhibits, for us to make decisions as to, for example, we knew there were a lot more doorways than we're going to need to use. But that doesn't mean we infill a doorway necessarily with, a wall. We were able to take a lot of the salvage doors that were on site, and we're going to put them back in their openings, but they're going to be fixed closed. They're not going to be for circulation through spaces, because that way we can again kind of invoke the history and evolution of these spaces and the original layout and character of the house, but still kind of keep to the museum circulation and flow. And as Chessie showed you the floor plan, when you look at the first floor plan, it really is only a third of the building that's going to be dedicated to the exhibits. Fortunately, it is the old building that is kind of dedicated to the exhibit space. It's the sort of the later wings where we are able to house the collection storage, which will be, you know, closed, except for a reading room, and secured. And then a tenant space, but also this is where we are able to insert or introduce a second means of egress that's code compliant, an elevator for vertical access to allow, you know, access to all the spaces to the visitor, as well as introduce restrooms that meet code and you know, are required for a museum space. And that we're able to kind of, again, knit the original layout back to its original plan, but working with the exhibit circulation and the visitor circulation to make that make sense. Some of the things that, like I said, we didn't have a whole lot of historic fabric aside of the envelope that was intact, and even the envelope, as you see, the blue vinyl siding, the replacement windows, the removal of a lot of the original porches. Those things were missing, but thank God for historic photos. Without historic photos, we would not have as good a sense of to how this building was originally constructed and how it evolved over time. Some of the things that I think were kind of creative design solutions. We know the windows originally were multi-pane. I mean, this was a late Victorian, early colonial revival home. Multi-pane windows are part of that architectural style. They've been long since replaced. But instead, because the funding didn't necessarily allow for replacement of all the windows are in fair condition. But wouldn't it be great to have, you know, more energy efficiency, and to when we're introducing a new HVAC system, to make sure that we're not losing that energy out through around the windows. So we are having storm windows, traditional wood storm windows, designed for the exterior of the house that will replicate that multi-paned window configuration based on the historic photos. So it's kind of a win-win. We're not throwing money away on new windows. We're keeping the original windows. We're adding another layer, which will allow for either UV film to, you know, further protect against. I mean, that's use if you want to use the storms to do that. That's, you know, kind of a sacrificial thing. But to invoke again the architectural style of the building while giving it an energy efficiency improvement. Let's see. The weirdness factor, as I really love that Chessie threw that in there, is that the evolution of the building, the changing of the building was something we study very carefully, right down to the fact that the original home, Trudeau home, was pretty regular in shape. And within less than a decade, Dr. Trudeau had to build his office wing off to on the west side, which will be the archives wing. That's part of its story, and that's part of and the way that this building is being reused and rehabbed will continue to be able to tell a story when someone maybe comes up the porch to Chessie's office, knocks on the door, to be able to visit and research something, you know, pulling the collections directly from the archives wing. It's kind of a similar approach that a patient would have had to Dr. Trudeau's office. The tenant wing on the southeast side is also a part of the story. It kind of obscured and kind of jutted out and towards the lab, but it will have a little bit of a different treatment, just so that the visitor or passerby will be able to say, I can see something different is happening there, to differentiate it from the original building. I mean, it's minor. It's going to be dealt with a difference in clapboard exposure and trim details and windows. It'll be subtle, but it'll be enough there for the trained eye to be able to pick up on. and I think it's really important to mention that we strive really hard to really find historic photos that showed us every elevation of the house, so that we could accurately redesign for a reconstruction the missing porches or the changes to the porches. In Saranac Lake, porches are kind of a big deal, and it provides an opportunity for the curators, the exhibit staff, curators to provide a segue into, let me tell you a little bit about porches here. They may be pricey as part of this, project costs to be adding, but they're kind of an important feature. I don't think this house would look the same if we didn't put them back. That's kind of the approach and the considerations for dealing with historic buildings. Number one, starting off with that your building is part of your collection, and an important part to find that balancing act between your exhibits and your building envelope. So I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Anybody in person or on Zoom have any questions for Kim? I just want to say, while you're thinking about that for a second, I totally threw Kim like on the spot. I was like, hey, like, Kim, will you talk to these people about whatever? So she's a total champ. So thank you.
I'm curious about the like the materials. Like you said, it was like a wood exterior. So do you know like what, I mean, I guess you haven't taken the siding off yet, but like, you probably peeked underneath it. Is it clear vertical cedar, or like what is it? Do you know anything about the materials or even the stonework and the bricks and stuff where they sourced from New York?
Yeah, so I know on your tour you're probably going to get upstairs to the West Cure porch. This is the only space where they did not strip away the original clapboards when they put the siding on. Everywhere else we did do, because we love probes, we love to peek underneath all these layers. We did pull back areas of the vinyl siding, only to find there was like a insulation board and tar paper, and then deck sheathing. They stripped all of the original wood siding off, but it's perfectly preserved on the West Cure porch. And what's really interesting about that, I know, is it's a very narrow exposure. It's less than 3 inches, which is not very common. I mean, although I've seen a number of houses in Saranac Lake with this exposure, it's a lot more wood. Obviously, the Adirondacks had a lot of accessibility to good quality wood at the turn of the century. I do believe it is clear cedar, or it may have been Eastern white pine. Anyways, it was, I don't know what caused them necessarily to remove it all. If there was, there's rumors that the paint was failing. It could have been paint prep or wood prep that led to that, and not necessarily the wood that was deteriorating. I don't know a lot about any of the brick. We do know that the stone foundations, it's granite, it's locally sourced granite, big kind of boulder, not dressed and squared. It's kind of like fieldstone. And we also do know that the roof kind of changed material multiple times. The back wing, which we call kind of the service wing, originally had a flat roof. It probably was a metal flat roof, and at some point they added a hip to it to join it with the main roof. But there's a little access hatch in the attic that you go through, and you can see the layers on a part of the covered up part of the main roof, where you could see wood shingles and standing seam metal, and then obviously the current asphalt. So again, the photos kind of help us kind of place when they changed different materials. And the vinyl siding didn't go on until, I think it was after the National Register nomination. So I think that was in the mid 90s. So it's not even been very long. So we are thrilled that that will be something we will be putting back. And that's why everyone's calling this kind of the big red house, because it will be, we were able to expose original paint colors. So we did do a little bit of that kind of architectural conservation investigations to kind of identify. We didn't want to just jump to any material choice. We needed to kind of have kind of documentation and proof to help us make those decisions.
One other thing I'll add is that our former director climbed in the dumpster when they put the blue siding on and stole a piece of the original siding, because who she is as a person, we're all that person, I think. So we have that in the collection, and so that helped us, like, without having to dismantle what's still on the cure porch. We were able to look at the color and the cedar, I forget what the hell cedar is, but and that's really great. But there are lots of places, as Kim said, where you can climb in a little spot and see the layers of history, literally, in the building materials. So, and I definitely had fun.
Yeah, I would add that we probably can expect to uncover some additional as the contractors move forward and start removing walls or taking layers off. And I think that it's important that we will be documenting that as it happens, making note. And if there's an exhibit that can come out of, the rehab of the Trudeau house there, I mean, I think we'll have plenty of artifacts or documents.
I was just thinking, like, why haven't we thought about that as the opening exhibit, the opening rotating exhibit? I gotta write that down. Good job, Kim. But thanks, Meg, for this comment about the skills and stuff. I think we've all had fun working on this project together. We've all gotten to know each other very well, and it takes a village to raise a house. So it's the great thing about our small staff and our consultants and things is that we really we all bring something different to the table, and we all have different priorities, and we have different considerations, and sometimes Kim might say something that leads me to a new exhibit unexpectedly. So it's been a really interesting process, and there's also a team that's doing the exhibit design. That's a whole other animal, and so we're doing a lot, but we're having a good time. We're learning a lot, and it's been really satisfying.
I would agree.
So
definitely this as a Cinderella project. I mean, it's going to be like the phoenix out of the ashes.
I wish that we could cover it, cover the whole thing, that we could do you guys remember that show, Extreme Makeover Home Edition, where they park the bus out front? I kind of wish we could do that, but it is what it is. It's a big building.
It is.
Yeah. We'll definitely do some, dramatic reveals. I mean, even that rendering is dramatic reveal, right? It's even the first time we saw that, we were like, so, it's going to be a big change. Any other questions from Zoomers or not before we cut everybody loose?
We got you, Meg.
Thanks, Meg. Meg says she's very excited about this project. So are we. So I just want to say that, we will be sharing a lot. Hi, Jack. In the next couple of years, you know, we try to do like a museum Monday where we show behind the scenes, and I suspect a lot of those will be about the Trudeau building. You know, we want community input, whether it's, you know, an oral history or a suggestion or an artifact, you know, but we want to document the hell out of this thing. And so, you know, if you ever have questions or want to see, you know, what we're up to, it's all on our website and our social media. The Museum Mondays, Meg asked about where Museum Mondays are.
Mhm.
They go on our social media, Facebook, Instagram. We have a Threads account now, but we abandoned Twitter, and we also have a Tumblr account now, which is very funny. I feel a particular sort of way about reopening a Tumblr account at age 36. But yeah.
Let's talk about Tumblr a little bit.
Yeah. So that, you know, we also do all sorts of features in the paper. We have
Yeah.
two dedicated spaces every week. We do an image of the week, and we do a 5Ws Wednesday. I love my alliterative titles, I guess. We also have a TB Thursday, but that doesn't go in the paper. But 5Ws Wednesday is an opportunity for us to publish pictures that we're like, what is going on here? Or like, who is this? Or whatever. And people from the community call in or email us and say, that's my uncle, so-and-so, or, you know, that's the house I grew up in, or whatever. And so it's been really, really helpful. So aside from all the, aside from all that work on the building we just talked about, as I mentioned, we have a second IMLS grant, well, third, fourth, whatever, another IMLS grant starting this fall for object and archival material cataloging, because we already did one about photos. So there will be tons more stuff coming up on our collections database as we work through that. Thank you for the congratulations, Meg. So, you know, there's a lot going on here. And
how long is this exhibit up that's about cataloging?
We haven't decided yet. So we have, for those of you who aren't here in person, we have a mini exhibit in the John Blackburn Library, which we are returning to its use as a library space now that we're expanding our collection storage and things. And so my assistant Emily and I put together this little exhibit that talks about the steps for receiving a donation and cataloging it, making it available to the public. It will at least be here through the end of this year, and maybe even longer, because, like, let's be real, I don't have any bandwidth for doing a new one probably this coming spring, with all the construction kicking off. But we also have a rotating exhibit in the room that's historic, believe it or not, photos from the year 2000 of small business owners here in Saranac Lake, and that was a collection that was recently donated to us. So, you know, things will keep happening in the Saranac laboratory too while we're working on all this construction. And so I just encourage everybody to stay tuned and, you know, send some like good night's sleep to all of us. So any other questions from anybody? It's so awesome to see Meg and Christy here. And of course to have people in the museum in person. If you do have questions, you should have all gotten my email address as part of the communication for this event. If you ever have a question, I'm happy to you know, tell you about what we've done or whatever. So, and I also happy to show people the building as I am able, but pretty soon it'll be hard hat territory. So I think we'll say adieu to everybody, unless Lydia has.
Just thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, we'll do I don't know, a little recording of it, snapshot, and just thank you, everybody.
Okay. Thanks, gang. Thanks for joining us, Kim.
No problem. Bye, everyone.
Bye.